المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خذنا على درب الأمل زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خذنا على درب الأمل.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Schools Out. I'm Shakira Akabo and today we're talking about homeschooling. With me today I have Mr. Idris Khamisa, who needs no introduction. Mr. Khamisa is an expert in education on a vast array of topics. Welcome to the show, Mr. Khamisa.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. Happy to be back.
Thank you. So, Mr. Khamisa, can you tell us some of the reasons why parents choose the option of homeschooling?
You find homeschooling today is a growing global phenomena, and there are as many reasons as there are people involved. There are those parents that are critical of schools, and they feel that the schools, because of the vastness of numbers, are not able, as it were, to unleash the potential of the child. There are others that are concerned because of the faith. They feel that they're concerned about the value systems of some schools that might be antithetical to their own faith. The other one, which is a very critical aspect, is the issue of bullying. Bullying is a very, very serious phenomena, and it has impact on the lives of many, many people. And others, because of financial reasons, you find that to take your kid today to a great school, you got to have financial resources. Because they do not have that, they prefer it to take charge themselves in terms of the child's education.
Is there anything parents should be aware of when we embark on this journey if we're considering homeschooling our children? What should be some of the things we should consider?
There are many things one needs to consider. The one critical thing is that some of us have a very jaundiced view of homeschooling. They see it purely in a model that the mother is there, she's in charge, as it were. To what extent she's conversant with educational psychology, the psychology of learning, issues of curriculum. It's hit or miss, as it were. And sometimes they can do far more damage than good. Because what happens when you do not understand education in its complete form, therefore, for example, whilst in America they call it homeschooling, other parts of the world they call it home education. And to me, I prefer home education because it's much more holistic. The critical aspect is this, that for a parent that is doing the homeschooling, they need to understand they do not have the monopoly of knowledge. So they need to engage others around them that have similar values to support the kid, and perhaps getting other like-minded children under the same roof. But the other important dimension is this, that you need to have a different persona. When you are there as a teacher, the persona, although the loving mom persona is there, she's got to make sure there are some parameters, there is a discipline that takes place. And when the structured homeschooling day is over, then she is no more the teacher. She is that mother, and she got to enjoy that relationship. Otherwise, what happens, in some cases people have seen that it has led to a lot of bitterness, as it were, and then the father, who is not really involved directly in homeschooling, is caught up in this mix, as it were. So there are a lot of factors need to be considered, and you got to understand that there are those kids that are homeschooled. There are many of them done in a very professional basis, like South African government is regulating, the laws regarding homeschooling, because a lot of kids have been damaged psychologically, as it were, from being homeschooled. So we need to look at many, many factors.
Just before we go for the break, Mr. Khamisa, is there any last words you have for not parents but for learners who are going to be homeschooled?
I think a very critical thing, homeschooling more than anything else requires a lot of self-discipline, the idea about managing your time, and you got to, for example, any child that wants to unleash his potential, He must become an avid reader. He must be critical. He must be able to ask questions. It just reminds me very, very quickly of one person who won the Nobel Prize. They asked him, to what do you attribute your success? He said, I attribute it to my mother. He says, your mother? He says, well, my mother was unlike any other mother. She never asked me, what have I learned today? But she asked me, what good question I asked today. So when children are encouraged to ask good questions, it develops in them a critical faculty, it develops them curiosity, it develops them the whole idea of research.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Khamisa, for taking your time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll take an ad break now. We'll be back after the break. Stay tuned.
سمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة سمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة.
Welcome back. We're back with the homeschooling episode, and now we're talking to Mr. Douglas Andrews from Radley Private School in Randburg, Johannesburg. Welcome back, Mr. Andrews.
Hi Shakira, and thank you for having me back on your show.
All right. So homeschooling, as you know, it's taken off in a really big way in South Africa. There are loads of parents choosing to homeschool their children. Can you maybe give us your opinion or why you think this is so?
Okay, I just want to, before I do that, I want to lens my opinion. You know, you're speaking to a school principal, and obviously for me, I want kids in schools.
Right.
So, you know, my opinions on homeschooling are informed from that background, but I do have quite a bit of experience with children homeschooling, and obviously how those children then integrate into the school system.
Okay.
So I can speak from that point of view.
Okay, that's perfect. So could you maybe tell us from your experience why you find homeschooling so common these days?
Well, the reason it's common is in a lot of cases people lose faith. They're fearful of the environment. They're fearful of not having control over their children's, in some cases, safety, or over the quality of the education their children might be receiving. They might worry about the exposure of their children to things in the school environment that might go against the kind of the moral dimension of the upbringing that the child has. And for that reason, and for many reasons, in some cases it's cultural or religious reasons.
Yes.
Children are taken out of what you could call your mainstream schooling environment,
Right.
and they are schooled at home.
Okay.
And I do, you know, people often just think of homeschooling as the child sitting at home all alone all day, but I do know of some homeschooling programs where children get tutors. They sometimes go to a central place and meet other children that are homeschooled. So there is quite a bit of structure in the homeschooling environment as well.
Yes, of course. There are many different ways of doing
Correct,
homeschooling.
yes.
We often find that this sometimes goes into what is known as cottage schooling. So you have the homeschooling set up, and you have. Can you tell us about a little bit about the difference between homeschooling and cottage schooling?
Well, it's a strange term, but your cottage schooling is a little bit where a community of parents, you know, who all are homeschooling their children, might get together, and it's out of a desire to create a social network for their children.
Right.
You know, where their children can be involved in, say, sport,
Yes.
social activities. They can maybe work together on projects, and they all come together. They might put a structure to it where they meet at, say, somebody's house. Maybe you'll get a group of tutors that come around there. And in a sense, what you're doing is you ultimately creating a small school environment,
So that's
but
what
one that
yeah.
you maybe have more control over than when you just enroll your
Yes.
child at the neighborhood school and send them on their way.
Yes.
So for me, homeschooling often speaks into that ability to have a say and an input and a control over what your child's experiences.
Definitely, cottage schooling and homeschooling differ because you expect the certain type of schooling for your child, and when the parents don't get that, then they maybe look at homeschooling as a viable option. Do you think that finances have anything to do with it or not?
You know, to tell you the truth, it could, but homeschooling in itself can be very expensive. It's not necessarily a cheaper option. I've spoken to parents whose kids are being homeschooled, and sometimes the costs are far more than a private school. You know, you've got to pay for certain computer programs, tutors come at a cost. and like every child out there, there's often areas of weakness where they need additional attention, and that all costs, that all adds up.
And the curriculum and the
Yes,
tutors
yes,
and everything
absolutely.
else. Okay.
And you take it to another extreme. When you bring your child to school, you would expect security for your child. You'd expect, that they come to a safe environment. If you've got them at home all day, you also want to make sure that your home is secured. So then you have costs that might not be directly related to the child's homeschooling, but they all play in. Food bills, having maybe upping your home security because your child is there possibly all day, and in some cases some children are homeschooled, but there isn't a mom or dad at home to homeschool them. You're relying on strangers to come into your home environment to provide the tutelage.
And you mentioned earlier as well about how your experience with children who have been homeschooled, so some parents choose it as a temporary measure, and then they eventually mainstream their children. What has your experience been? How do these children transition between the two?
Yeah, look, it's different for every child, and I don't want to generalize, but you do usually find that there's a transition period when kids do, say, come back into or come for the first time into more of a mainstream school environment. You find that it might take them a while to get used to the routines and to socialize and to make friends and to work out how does a lesson work. It's because for children who've come, say, from grade 1 all the way up through school, being in a classroom, there's almost a social dynamic to it. There's a way you relate, the way you interact. Now they're stepping into that, say, in grade 5 or 6. They're coming into that very cold. They don't understand the dynamics and the construct of that. So there is definitely a period of time of adjustment. What you do find as well in some cases is when children are homeschooled, often assessment doesn't carry with it the same amount of, say, pressure or anxiety that would be in a mainstream school environment.
Yes.
So now children suddenly have to write tests, and there's a time frame attached to it.
Yes.
And it's maybe been hyped up with the general emotion of a whole group of people. And your homeschooled child making that adjustment can often find that quite disconcerting.
Thank you. Thank you for that very informative perspective. Any last words you'd like to share with parents who are considering embarking on a homeschooling journey?
I always say don't make homeschooling a knee-jerk reaction to a bad experience, because you often see that. Children will be in a school, there might be a bullying incident, or maybe the school you've got your child at doesn't foreground inclusive education, and you feel your child is not getting the attention that they require, which can be the case. And then often the knee-jerk reaction is, let's move away from any type of formal school setting. I think that kind of decision takes time, it takes investigation, and a certain amount of research on behalf of the parent. Also, look at other school options first before you go the homeschooling route. I always say that a school is like a good worn couch. Not every school suits every child.
Absolutely.
It's like if you want to see a psychologist, not every psychologist is the right person for you. So you need to explore your options, and if the problem is maybe your child is in a school and you feel that the class size is too big, maybe explore different avenues, explore schools with smaller classes, look at the ethos of the school. And once you've done that whole kind of case study or that research on your child and schooling, then you start to make that decision to go the homeschooling route.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrews. Much appreciated. You've given us a lot of food for thought, especially to our parents. Those of you that are considering homeschooling, it's not a decision made easily. We have to give it a lot of thought, do the research, look at your options before you make that final decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shakira. Nice to be here.
سمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة سمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة.
Welcome back to Schools Out. With us we have homeschooling mom Rubina Gur, who has been homeschooling her 4 children for the past 14 years. Welcome to the show, Rubina.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. So tell us, what set you on this journey of homeschooling?
Okay, so I've been passionate about education, for a very long time. I even studied and to complete a teaching degree. And what happened was that as our children started growing and getting into schools, we found that there was always something my husband and I were not happy with. So we got quite involved with a community school, and we did whatever we could. But there was a big problem because our vision for our children obviously was very different from the vision of the community. So that actually stimulated us and gave us an idea of, hey, you know what, let's do this. And we did have friends that started, so alhamdulillah, we started on this journey.
Alhamdulillah. So tell us about this vision that you're mentioning. Tell us
Okay,
more.
so it was about looking at the child as a whole human being and not fragmented, and not making the subjects or the academics fusing with the human being. It was more about how do we create a human being? I mean, how do we create a discipline or a complete person rather than just calling ourselves like I've done this or I've done that, or that type of thing. And the other thing is that we wanted more than just looking at academics for children. We wanted emotional healing. We wanted them to have akhlaq, their morals and values and all of that in place. So that was also very, very important.
Okay. And how do your kids accept this? Like, are you mum to them 1 minute, and then are you the teacher, and are they happy with the transition?
That's an excellent question, because for the first 2 years it was very difficult. I just had switched myself into teacher mode, and then was guided and said, you're the only mum to your children. They'll have many teachers in their lives. So I then embraced the mum role, and alhamdulillah, that has been the most beautiful journey.
So tell me more about that embracing the mum role. So are you more of a mum than a teacher?
Absolutely, because a mum is generally, is always guiding her children. So it wasn't about playing this role of being this teacher that I'm supposed to be the way the schools were and things like that. So that made it very easy, because love was the first thing that came out then. But before, it was more about what's right and what's wrong. And it was like, let's use respect and love and all of those tools to be able to embrace the journey of homeschooling.
And how has it worked out for you?
Alhamdulillah, it's been really good. Our eldest is already qualified as an engineer. The second one took the GED route, which is also one of the ways of getting your matric exam. And then the third one, inshallah, is also embarking on his journey to university. And then our fourth one is at my husband's school, Open Minds campus.
Okay, so is this the school that we are sitting in front of?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And I'm sure your husband will be telling us more about his,
absolutely.
his school.
Absolutely.
Okay. Jazakallah so much for chatting to us, Rubina.
Barakallah, inshallah, all the best. And just a bit of advice, enjoy the journey. There'll be a lot of fears and doubts, but just take it, embrace it, and just be willing to say, you know what, I'm going to look at what needs to be, looked at in terms of the way I see things and how to embrace it, and inshallah it will be beautiful.
Okay, so there you go. Take each day as it comes. That's the advice from Rubina Gur, who's been homeschooling her kids for more than 14 years now. We are now chatting to Siraj Gur, homeschooling dad and founder of Open Minds campus in Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, Siraj.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming all the way here.
Tell us a bit about your journey as a homeschooling dad.
Okay, I've always had interest in education, and myself and Rubina always discussed the schools which our children went to. Jointly, we did run a community school where we were living in Mafeking, and we were always involved in it together. And when Rubina received a book, funny enough, from Brother Idris Khamisa about homeschooling, she just dived into it, and I said, yes, go for it. And it just so happened that the whole homeschooling journey sparked many ideas in my head, and I began to do a lot of research. And I became a firmer believer in alternative education than Rubina, I would say.
Oh, okay, that's fascinating. So tell us, on this journey, you have now come to the point where it's been many years. You now have founded a learning center. Tell us about that. How did you get to this point?
Well, it just so happened that I moved to Johannesburg a few years ago, and I had an idea while I was homeschooling that I want to one day, inshallah, open up a alternative school which is child-driven, child-led, and which will give students a lot of freedom in terms of how they direct their own learning, and to take away the pressures, the punishments and the reward systems of the school system. And also, it was also partly me reflecting on my life and thinking about how my schooling journey affected me and what challenges I had to overcome in my life beyond school, and then to think about, okay, if I perhaps had a different schooling experience, I think, and if it was more alternative and more child-driven and child-led, I think I would have found coping with life easier.
It's actually very fascinating that education has such far-reaching implications into our lives.
Absolutely.
Tell us more about now, like if other parents want to embark on this journey, what are the legal aspects? You know, there's been so much of news about the new draft bill, about homeschooling getting tighter in South Africa. Tell us about that.
Okay, there is a bill which has been released for comment, and the Legal Defence Fund for Home Education, the Pestalozzi Trust, has spearheaded a campaign to inform the Department of Education about the dangers of too much control of the homeschool movement, because in the end, alternative education is here to stay. A lot of people, they say 100,000 homeschoolers have embraced it. And what I would advise all homeschoolers to do is to join the Pestalozzi Trust, and they will cover you legally. And just be aware that there has been a court case where it has been decided that homeschoolers cannot be forced to follow the CAPS curriculum.
So that is probably a win in the homeschoolers' direction.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Although this case happened a few years ago.
Okay. And in terms of registering your child, you know, apart from the Pestalozzi Trust, but in terms of registering your child with the Department of Education, is that now a requirement if you choose to homeschool?
Homeschooling has always been legal. However, very few homeschoolers do register with the Department of Education. And that is because they don't want to follow the CAPS curriculum. However, many homeschoolers who do follow the formal curriculum don't mind registering, and that is their choice, and that works for them.
It works for them. And tell us about your challenges. Earlier on we were discussing challenges on your journey. Tell us a bit about the challenges.
I think the challenges has been largely on how to have kept Rubina motivated to continue. Because it certainly has been a tough journey, because I think homeschooling by nature brings out the independence in the students, and they have much more choice and freedom in how they do things. And they will challenge the parents in terms of following a formal curriculum. But I think what one has to realize is that there are many flavors to homeschooling. On the one extreme, there's the formal school at home like curriculum where you have a CAPS curriculum, for example. You have exams, tests, projects, and you go through homeschooling year by year the way you would do in a school system, except it's done at home. On the other extreme, you have unschooling, where there's no curriculum, where there's where even degrees or having a degree is heavily debated in the family, because the value of degrees is something which we question as well. And in the unschooling system, the child will then lead by his interest and her interest, but they're not forced to learn to read. They're not forced to do mathematics. Whatever they learn would be incidental rather than prescribed. And then obviously in the middle, which is where we are at, is more an informal school curriculum where the child still leads the way, and we focus more on math and languages, and we slow down or we speed up as the child prefers.
Okay. In terms of, you mentioned now, you mentioned something about the formal curriculum. Is it necessary, because a lot of homeschooling parents purchase, expensive curriculum sets, is it necessary to do this?
If you want the formal curriculum, yes. then you probably have to, and it does become expensive. However, you don't have to. You can just buy what you need.
Okay.
We do support homeschoolers through the books which we import from Singapore and from UK.
Right.
And we advise homeschoolers accordingly.
Right.
And in that way they can, yes, obviously save costs.
Right. But is it entirely possible to begin with without a formal curriculum, or must you use the CAPS, which is the GDE curriculum, or like how does a parent now decide, okay, I'm homeschooling my child, what should I be doing?
In a lot of cases, parents begin with the CAPS curriculum. However, what happens is that often it doesn't work because it's just too much for the student. And the CAPS curriculum has also been criticized for not having a good scope and sequence, and for being too content driven. And I believe that if one focuses on the core skills of math and languages, with the rest you can, the science, geography, history, you can do through many other means besides a formal curriculum. And you don't need the exams and tests either.
Okay, thank you. That's all we have time for today. We would have loved to continue this discussion further. Thank you very much for watching our episode on homeschooling. We will see you next week, inshallah, same time for another episode of Schools Out. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.